You are my queen. Now and always. Shut your fucking mouth!
So, The Shadows Rising, Book 4 of The Wheel of Time. Now, this entry maintains what I liked about The Dragon Reborn, making this another solid entry in the series. The Shadows Rising is split off into 3 main storylines. So it picks off right where The Dragon Reborn leaves off. And we are in Tear right now. The beginning of this book was a little bit mixed for me. For the majority of it, I actually liked. There were some really great moments there, some standout chapters. But for me, the issue in this first couple hundred pages once again comes down to the series' main fault, which is dynamics. Despite the fact that all of these characters are here together in the same location, they're still in their own little bubble of their own little groupings that they're usually with. So you would always see Nynaeve, Elaine, and Egwene together. You would always see Rand and Moiraine together. You'd always see Perrin and his new love interest Phil together. Even though they're all in the same location, they're still so distant. They're in their own little bubble. This is one of the few opportunities where characters can interact with other characters that you don't normally see them interact with, just to build the rapport and really try to get a sense that, here's the thing though, we're 4 books in, I still don't really feel this connection with the Emmonsfielders. Don't get me wrong. As the series moves forwards, it's all the other brand new dynamics that they develop and are introduced that are really interesting, but this main dynamic between the Emmonsfielders, which is quite important to the series and should be the dynamic that has the most focus on, the most development on, I still don't really feel it. Don't get me wrong, Nynaeve and Egwene have a somewhat well-defined relationship, and I see it there. However, what we do get in the beginning is some great stuff with Rand. So Rand is finally becoming an interesting character. Rand is really interesting in this book, especially in the beginning. He's at the heart of this major shift in this world, and seeing him become more, trying to get a wider grasp of his powers that right now no one really understands, including himself, as well as become the most important political figure. That is some great stuff that is introduced here. We don't get too much development there, but it's introduced here. What I do love in the beginning, in terms of dynamics and relationships, is this new kind of conflicting relationship between Tom Merrilin and Moiraine. They are both these Machiavellian figures who are so ingrained with the Great Game. Moiraine coming from Caerhien, which is known for the Great Game, and Tom using his the knowledge he gained while in Camlin, right? These two are trying to draw the influence of the other away from Rand, and seeing those butting of heads was great. I did not expect to see that. It's such an interesting dynamic that was just introduced there, but once again we don't get too much development. This is another point for my issue with the relationships and the dynamics in this series, is that for the ones that are introduced that we don't really care for, there's not much that happens there to change your mind. For example, the whole Elaine and Rand romance, don't feel it, don't really care. But all the great new ones that are being introduced, like Moiraine and Tom, they're only being introduced, we don't get much further development, unfortunately, there. However, when this book really shines when everyone splits off to their main storylines, and that's kind of how I wanna give you my brief overview for each of these 3 storylines before I get into my spoilers. Now let's talk about the Nynaeve, Elaine, Tantric Storyline. So right now they are continuing the storyline of hunting the Black Arja, and we get some amazing exploration from different cultures such as the Sea Folk, and Tantric is mostly just it mostly feels like an occupation for them while they are doing this whole Black Arja storyline. There's also some new characters that are introduced in the storyline that were really quite compelling. Out of all the climaxes for the 3 storylines, this was probably my favourite because it was the most cathartic and it was awesome. I'll talk more in this spoiler section. Perrin's storyline, but once Perrin returns to Emmonsfield, man, there are some emotional moments, like stuff that really moved me. That I was like, wow, I didn't really expect this from Perrin's storyline. Like, wow, like Perrin continues to be a really interesting character, and seeing him really, this is the most growth we've seen from Perrin, and it was great to see. It was great to see that. And Emmonsfield returning once again, it's a wonderful location that I loved in the first book. I wish we got to spend more time in, and we get that in this book, and that's awesome. However, the standout for this book is the Ruiding storyline, which is the main storyline with Rand, Moiraine, Gwen, and Mat. And man, the exploration into the Aiel culture and their history. The Aiel culture is one of the most, in just one book, one of the most well-developed cultures I've seen in a fantasy book, period. Like, that alone makes the Ruiding storyline amazing. And amongst that, we get some amazing, like, just some really great magical moments, like moments that are so high concept. I'm like, I love this. There's some amazing high concept stuff. Anyway, I don't want to get into spoilers, but overall, Shadows Rising, I really like this book. I really like this entry. I think I liked it just as much as I liked The Dragon Reborn. For me, what kind of draws back from this is that Perrin and Perrin and Rand's storylines, their climaxes, were a bit abrupt. And I was like, oh, there's kind of this last minute thing that's introduced, or it just ends abruptly. And abrupt is the word I'll use, which is why it drew back from me from just gushing about this book, because I feel like Jordan didn't really nail the climax as well as he could have. Otherwise, it's a solid book. All right, now let's get into the spoilers. So let's start off with the beginning, with all of them in Tear. Overall, I like this. I like seeing these characters just hang about, just talking to each other, and that's cool. That's fine. I just wish they could have interacted with the other groupings more. Maybe we could have seen more Gwen talking to other characters a bit more. We did get some small stuff with Gwen and Mat, which I appreciated. Once again, it still feels very surface level, some of the dynamics, in my opinion. However, seeing Rand become much more layered, especially when that Trolloc break-in happens, and the whole fight scene happens, and seeing him fail to save that one girl and come to the realization, despite the fact that he's a Dragon Reborn, he's not the creator and he can't save everyone. And that's the kind of emotional depth I want to see in the character and the protagonist, and we're finally getting that with Rand. Once again, Moiraine and Tom, everything I said before applies here. I loved the way Jordan presented this new rift, but we don't get much aside from that. There were some good moments in the beginning. I liked how it's just them kind of just hanging around. Like Mat going through the Terre Angriel, what an atmospheric chapter. That was such a great chapter. And also, gotta mention it, even though I just don't really care about it. Man, the romances in this series Elaine and Rand, I don't feel anything there. Don't really care about it. And that whole Gwen admitting, like, coming to the realization that she no longer loves Rand, it felt like the Ember Island players in Avatar: The Last Airbender.
I just want to let you know, Aang, that I'll always love you. Like a brother.
I wouldn't want it any other way!
Romances aren't the best in this series. Perrin and Fail were alright. The bickering was a bit overbearing in the beginning, especially when they're traveling through the ways. But his interactions with the other Aiel, especially Gol, I think it is, kind of made up for that. I was like, this is some kind of banter. This is kind of funny. I'm more accepting of it. I don't really cringe my eyes like I do with Elaine and Rand. And then also, when it comes to the romances, Jordan does the thing where, you're adding in Berelaine, who's this seductive Dumani woman, and she's driving a wedge between all the different romances. Like, oh no, Elaine's annoyed because Berelaine is seducing Rand. Oh no. Like, I swear, there was a moment where Fail and Berelaine just start fighting, and I'm like, okay, this feels like a hentai. Once again, it's when they split off, it's when the story truly starts. Now, I'll start off with the Tantric Storyline. Exploring the sea folk culture in the beginning was great. I think it's very South Asian inspired, which, if that's the case, awesome, represent. But once again, exploring the sea folk there, finally learning that there are women outside of the White Tower, outside of the Aes Sedai, who can channel. That's something that they really establish well, not only with the sea folk, but with the wise ones in the Aiel. That's something that Jordan really cleared up. That's a question I had, so I'm glad he answered it. And once you get to Tanchico, you got a little bit of information about their culture, the way they dress, you know, the veil they have. But outside of that, it's mostly just an occupation for Nynaeve and Elaine, Tom and Julian to really have some proactive story right there. What really surprised me about the storyline, was Eganin. Now, this is a character who is an ex-Sinshan warrior, and obviously these characters have had their buttons with the Sinshan before, and they did not end in quite nice terms. Like, they hate the Sinshan, right? So I was a bit confused, but I was wondering what was Jordan really doing with this. But once I seen he's created a side character who's kind of emotionally conflicted. She's been raised all this time to hate Aes Sedai and treat them like essentially like slaves, right? And to befriend these two Aes Sedai girls and know that, oh no, these are just normal people, right? That's great. I love it. I love stories where you have people who are indoctrined with this ideology, and then to go on their own journeys and realize, oh no, that was all a lie. My childhood, everything I learned from a young age was all a lie. And accept that and try to grow as a person. Like, wow, this is a side character. Jordan did not need to go this hard with a side character, and I appreciate that. I appreciate that he went into so much depth for just a side character. And outside of that, you know, Nynaeve and Elaine, you know, butting heads, but then, you know, they've got a somewhat defined bond. I also really like the relationship between Tom and Elaine, and how he's kind of like the surrogate father figure for her now, since he's someone who she remembers from her childhood. Once again, good stuff, very surface level, but we don't get too much out of it. Well, we do get amazing moments, but the climax was awesome. The Ter Hungryal heist mission, and then Nynaeve's fight with the Forsaken Moghedien. I hope I'm saying that right. I'm butchering names. I'm so sorry. But that whole thing, awesome climax. Awesome. Like, Ter Hungryal heist mission. You pitch that, you win me over. That sounds awesome. Now let's talk about the Perrin storyline. So once again, Perrin and Phil, I don't mind them. You know, the bickering's kind of funny, but it really is when he goes to Emmonsfield and finds out that his family was killed. Also, fuck Padon Fane. Oh my god, I hate him. Please, I'm waiting for him to have the most brutal death. I hope this man gets sheared in half. Anyway, I'm moving it along. Like, when he found out his family died, and he was kind of in denial because he didn't really have a strong emotion, and then once Phil told him, you know, your family died, grief, you know, just cry, and then he just explodes. It was a really well written moment. Emmonsfield, they're being hit by Trollocs. There are White Cloaks. The White Cloaks are kind of the only source of protection they have, and they have no other choice but to agree to White Cloak supervision over Emmonsfield. And now Perrin obviously has some beef with the White Cloaks, right? They don't like Perrin. And once seeing Perrin become this kind of savior figure, this kind of like this, oh, Lord Perrin, you know, he's just the savior of Emmonsfield, and that was great to see. It's the rise of Perrin, like legions of Trollocs and Midrals that threatens the two rivers, and he's trying to get them ready to prepare for this battle. Once again, great stuff. We see the two Aes Sedai's, Varen and Alana, I think it is, part of the storyline as well. They had some amazing interactions with Perrin as well. Once again, all these different elements here, seeing the return of familiar faces, all great stuff. Perrin was awesome. Climax, it was a bit abrupt, you know, when Phil left, and then before the Trollocs, you know, about to completely decimate them, they get last minute help. I'm like, oh, okay, it's a bit of a Deus Ex Machina, which, you know, Deus Ex Machinas can be really cool sometimes. Here, it felt abrupt, in my opinion. But it's the only thing that draws it away, because overall, I did enjoy the Perrin storyline here. Now let's talk about the Ruiding storyline. So, jumping into Telar and Riod, Gwen meets this wise one called Amis in Telar and Riod, and she has to go to Ruiding in the Aiel Waste to train to become a dreamer. And along with her goes Rand and Matt for two different reasons, right? And wow, This Ruiding Storyline, I loved it. I loved it. It's so awesome. The first half is so good. We learn so much about the Aiel culture. Even before they go to Ruiding, meeting all these wise ones, learning about all the different clans like the Shido and whatnot. Just amazing stuff. I loved it. Then once Rand and Matt do go to Ruiding, whoa, that whole genetic memory, ancestral memory, time hopping chapter, whatever it is so high concept. It's so weird, and I loved it. That was such a good chapter where essentially every paragraph we are going further and further back in time. So, for example, Rand is seeing the memories of his ancestors, and then once that memory segment is done, we see his father's memories, and then his father's father's memories, and his father's father's, and then in each chapter there will be a reference of that person's father, and then the next paragraph we get that person's viewpoint when he was a young man, and then once this goes further back in time, we learn that the Aiel weren't always these warriors. They did not even want to pick up a weapon. They were actually part of the Way of the Leaf, right? Because this is the Way of the Leaf is something that we saw in book 1 with Perrin, and now we learned that the Aiel actually followed this way, and which is the complete antithesis of what they are now. That was so fascinating. What's even more interesting, I thought I was bugging out when I was reading this. I was like, wait a minute. The final ancestral memory is the one that's furthest back in time, and it's the most futuristic one. And I was like, I don't know if I'm reading this wrong here, but that's an airplane. That's a car. Like, Jordan is describing a car right now. What is going on? And then I remembered the very first chapter of Eye of the World in young Egwene's perspective, where Tam Alfor is talking about a time in the Age of Legends when there was like tall ass buildings and futuristic planes and whatnot, and we've got hints of these remnants of this ancient civilization, its ancient past in the actual storylines with certain buildings and whatnot. But this is like a full-on confirmation that no, in the Age of Legends it was a modern world, and obviously shit happened because it doesn't look like that anymore. I'm like, this is Assassin's Creed, right? This is Assassin's Creed. Ancient civilization that's technologically advanced, this cataclysmic apocalypse happens. Oh, the world is not like it's used to. It's drawn back generations and generations back. Ter'angreal's pieces of Eden's magical objects from the Age of Legends. Like, this is Assassin's Creed. Whoever wrote Assassin's Creed must have been a Wheel of Time fan. I'm just saying it here. That also was once again interesting. He doesn't have much to do like he did in The Dragon Reborn, but we get some great moments like him going through the Ter'angreal, meeting these weird people. We're getting a new prophecy associated with Matt, and also Matt gains these two Ter'angreals, this spear and this medallion. And like, I've read book 5. I wouldn't say anything, but Avienda, guys, I think it's official. I think I'm in love. If this was an anime, Avienda is the best waifu. 100%. 100%. If there was a poll right here, if the Wheel of Time was an anime, all these weeaboos would 100% be simping for Avienda right now. She is the best girl. I mean, she'd hate me in real life and try to kill me, but I love her. I love Avienda. I love her interaction with the brand. I love that she's so reluctant to teach him the Aiel ways. I love how she always just belittles him and just knocks him off his pedestal. I love the fact that she kind of hates the fact that she has to be this personal kind of bodyguard to Rand. That introduction, that's a new dynamic that I love. I love dynamics like that. What I had with the Ruiding Storyline is that climax. Obviously, Couladin and the Shido betraying him was set up quite well. And I was like, okay, when he proclaimed himself as a Dragon Reborn, he's got those tattoos now that really confirms the fact that he is. And Couladin, kind of betraying him in a way. It was set up well. I expected that. So I expected the climax to involve Couladin in some way. But no, it's another Forsaken battle. And it's so abrupt. So there are these Caravana people that are introduced halfway through. They're secretly Lanfear and Asmodean, the two Forsakens, and then Ran straight up, goes through a portal, fights Asmodean, and comes back. If that is not abrupt, I don't know what is. I personally would have had this reveal much earlier. I would have had the audience know that these two people are secretly Forsakens that are after Rand before Rand finds out himself. It's kind of like a pathetic fallacy kind of moment. I feel like that would have been much better than this abrupt fight scene that we got. However, the actual fight scene was actually really written really well. I thought it was like really atmospheric. I understood everything that was happening. I was so engaged. The actual prose involved, the actual writing of that fight scene was great. Just the way it was placed, maybe not so much. Once again, Rand battling another Forsaken at the end of the book. This is 4 times out of 4. I do not need to have my climaxes have Rand battle a Forsaken. It's getting tedious and it's repetitive. So despite all of that, this book moves quite well. It's 1,000 pages long. I think some of it could have been cut. Actually, not really. You know what? Not really. This is 1,000 pages long and I wouldn't cut much. I enjoyed most of what happened here. Obviously, my big issues lies with there's some great dynamics here, some dynamics that are not so much, and climax is still a bit hit or miss. And that's kind of been the vein of the existence for the Wheel of Time. My issues with this series so far are dynamics and the climaxes, and that continues to be somewhat of an issue here. Although there are more newer dynamics that introduce amazing new characters that will make me a bit more forgiving of this book compared to the previous ones. Overall, I would give this the same rating as The Dragon Reborn, 8.5. I would do that because The Dragon Reborn felt like more of a contained, focused book for me, and it had big moments. This is more of it's a great world building book. It's a great exploration of culture, and we get some amazing character development. It doesn't have those big moments that we'd see in The Dragon Reborn, but once again, it's not as focused as A Dragon Reborn, but there's so much like meat on here that I really loved, which is why I would put it on the same level as A Dragon Reborn, an 8.5. That's a solid 8.5. The series is definitely improving. I'm definitely getting more invested in. I'm actually invested in the series right now. So not the Dragon Reborn, The Shadows Rising was another solid entry in the Wheel of Time. So thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.